I was reading a death sentence when my heart stopped. That is the truth of it. Simple and terrible. My hand was steady. My voice carried across every corner of Courtroom 3. The words on the page in front of me held the fate of 10 human lives, and I was delivering those words the way I had delivered hundreds before. With authority. With certainty. With the absolute conviction that I was doing the will of Allah. 10 people stood before me in chains that morning. 10 former Muslims who had abandoned Islam and chosen to follow Jesus Christ. I was Judge Amir Mustafa. For 19 years, I had been the most feared Sharia judge in Kabul. That morning, October 14, 2024, I was about to hand down the harshest blasphemy sentence Afghanistan had seen in over a decade. Then I collapsed behind the bench. My heart went silent for 12 minutes and 31 seconds. And in those 12 minutes, I stood face to face with the very God I was condemning those 10 people for worshipping. Everything I had believed for 41 years crumbled to dust in his presence. The morning started like every other trial day. I woke at 4:30 for Far prayer, pressed my forehead to the mat in my home in the Kardi-e-Mamrin district of Kabul, and whispered the same supplications I had whispered since I was a boy. I ate bread and green tea with my wife Fatima and my 14-year-old daughter Zara before she left for school. I drove to the court complex on Puli Charkhi Road in my old Toyota Corolla, the same route I had taken for years. The streets were crowded as always. Kabul never truly rests. It only holds its breath between one storm and the next. The October air was cold that morning. You could feel winter creeping down from the Hindu Kush Mountains, settling into the concrete and into your bones. But inside Courtroom 3, the air was suffocating. Too many bodies packed into a space designed for 60. The heat of the crowd pressed against my skin the moment I walked through the side entrance. They had come from across the country to watch me pass judgment. The left side of the gallery was filled with officials from the Ministry for the Propagation of Virtue and Prevention of Vice. Men with long beards and white turbans who sat with their arms folded across their chests, watching the defendants the way a hawk watches movement in the grass below. Behind them sat mullahs who had traveled from Kandahar, Herat, and Jalalabad. Religious authorities from 3 provinces, all present to witness the example being made. The right side of the gallery was smaller and quieter. Families of the accused. A woman in a faded blue burqa sat in the front row with her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles had gone white. Beside her, 2 boys, maybe 8 and 10 years old, sat frozen with a kind of stillness that only comes from deep fear. Outside the building, I could hear the crowd. 300 people or more pressing against the iron gates, chanting words I had heard 1,000 times before. Death to the apostates. Protect the faith. No mercy for blasphemers. Their voices pushed through the thick walls of the courtroom like a drumbeat. I entered through the side door at exactly 9:15 a.m. My clerk, Tariq, met me with the case file. It was thick, stuffed with witness statements, photographs of confiscated Bibles, printed screenshots of social media posts, transcripts of secret recordings. He handed it to me without a word, but I noticed his hands trembling. I did not ask why. The bailiff called the court to order, and the room fell silent instantly. All rise for the Honorable Judge Amir Mustafa. They rose. I climbed the 3 steps to the bench, sat in the high-backed wooden chair, adjusted my robes, and looked out over the courtroom. Every pair of eyes was locked on me. I could feel the weight of expectation pressing down like a hand on my shoulders. The officials from the ministry wanted severity. The mullahs wanted a message. The media wanted a headline. These people had not come for justice. They had come for punishment. And for 19 years, I had been the man who delivered it without flinching. The 10 defendants were brought through the rear entrance in a single line. Chains linked their wrists and ankles, forcing them to shuffle across the floor like prisoners being marched to execution. 5 men. 5 women. Their ages ranged from 22 to 57. I had studied their names from the file the night before. Farhan, 34, a former engineer and the group's leader, the one who had started an underground church in his apartment in the Taimani district. Maryam, 28, a schoolteacher before the Taliban shut down the girls' schools, caught leading a women's Bible study. Yusuf, 57, a retired shopkeeper from Herat, found 43 Bibles hidden beneath the floorboards of his home. and 7 others, each with a story of how they had left Islam and followed Christ. They stood in the dock surrounded by armed guards. But what struck me, what I could not understand at the time, was their faces. Not one of them looked afraid. They looked like people who had already settled something inside themselves that I had not even begun to wrestle with. I had been a Sharia judge for 19 years. In that time, I had presided over more than 200 cases. Theft, fraud, adultery, apostasy, blasphemy. I had earned the title some whispered behind my back. The Iron Judge. I wore that name like a medal. I never showed mercy where the law did not require it. I never questioned a directive from above. I prayed 5 times a day without fail. I fasted during Ramadan with a discipline that impressed even the senior mullahs at my mosque. I had memorized 30 chapters of the Quran by the age of 15. By every standard the Islamic world uses to measure a man, I was righteous, faithful, devoted, a servant of Allah, a shield for the faith. That is what I believed about myself on the morning of October 14th. I believed I was performing holy work. I believed those 10 chained human beings were enemies of God. I believed that condemning them was an act of worship. I was wrong about every single part of it. The defense lawyer stood. His name was Khalid. He was an older man, maybe 60, thin frame, wire-rimmed glasses, the kind of quiet dignity that comes from decades of practicing law in impossible conditions. He had survived every regime, every shift in power, by keeping his head down and doing his job. But that morning something in his eyes was different. He cleared his throat and addressed the bench. "Your Honor," he said, his voice steady but barely above speaking volume. "My clients do not deny the charges. They distributed Christian literature. They gathered in homes to pray. They spoke about their faith to those who asked. These facts are established." He paused and glanced back at the 10 defendants, then returned his gaze to me. "But I ask this court to consider one thing. Not a single one of these people harmed another human being. Not one of them coerced or forced their beliefs on anyone. They believed something different and they lived quietly according to that belief. In any just society, that is not a crime." The left side of the gallery erupted. Shouts of shame and blasphemy and "how dare you" from the religious officials. I slammed the gavel 3 times before silence returned. I looked at Khalid for a long time. The cameras were recording. The officials from the ministry were watching my face for any sign of softness, any crack in the wall. I could feel their expectation like heat from a furnace. "Mr. Khalid," I said, and my voice came out flat and cold, exactly the way I had trained it to sound over 19 years. "This court does not operate on personal definitions of justice. It operates on the law of Allah as revealed in the Holy Quran and upheld by the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan. Your clients abandoned Islam. They embraced a false religion. They spread that falsehood to others in direct violation of Sharia law. The penalty is clear and has always been clear. Is there anything else?" Khalid opened his mouth as if to speak, then closed it. He looked at the 10 defendants one last time, then shook his head. "No, Your Honor," he said quietly and sat down. Across the aisle, the prosecutor, a sharp-eyed man named Nasir, straightened his papers and allowed himself a thin smile. He gave me a single nod. The message was obvious. "Finish it." I opened the sentencing document and began to read. "In the name of Allah, the most gracious, the most merciful, this court finds the defendants guilty of blasphemy and apostasy under Sharia law. The evidence is overwhelming and undisputed. The defendants have shown no remorse and have refused every opportunity to recant and return to Islam. Therefore this court sentences." The tightness hit me without warning. A pressure behind my sternum, dull at first, as if a fist were slowly closing around my heart from the inside. I inhaled deeply and tried to push through it. This court sentences the defendants to. The pressure became pain. Sharp and sudden, shooting down my left arm, crawling up the side of my neck and into my jaw. My vision blurred. The words on the page doubled and swam together. I gripped the edge of the bench with both hands. Cold sweat broke across my forehead. Something was wrong. Something was terribly wrong. Your Honor. Tarek's voice reached me from what sounded like the far end of a tunnel. Are you all right? I tried to answer. My mouth opened and what came out was not words but a raw scraping gasp, the sound of lungs forgetting how to work. The courtroom tilted. The ceiling became the wall. The rows of faces in the gallery spun around me like a wheel. I reached for the gavel, some instinct telling me to hold on to something solid, and my fingers closed around the wooden handle for 1 second before every ounce of strength drained from my hand. The gavel slipped from my grip and fell, striking the marble floor with a crack that rang through the courtroom like a gunshot. Then I was falling, backward off the bench, my robes tangling around my legs as gravity took me. I hit the ground and felt nothing. My body was shutting down faster than my mind could understand. I heard screaming, Tarek shouting for a doctor, the bailiff's boots pounding across the floor, a woman in the gallery crying out in a voice that broke with terror, Allah have mercy on him. But every sound was pulling away from me, growing quieter and more distant, as if someone were pressing a pillow slowly over the ears of my soul. The court medic reached me first. I know this only because they told me afterward. He checked for a pulse. There was none. He began chest compressions, both hands stacked over my sternum, pressing down hard and fast. A paramedic unit arrived within 5 minutes. They cut my judicial robes open down the center and attached defibrillator pads to my bare chest. The first shock sent my body jerking off the ground like a puppet yanked by invisible strings. No pulse. The second shock came 15 seconds later. Nothing. A third shock, stronger than the first two. My body convulsed and went still. Nothing. No heartbeat. No breathing. My pupils were fixed and wide. The lead paramedic, a woman named Salma with steady hands and a calm voice that had guided her through 1,000 emergencies, stared at the monitor for a long moment. She checked the clock on the courtroom wall. She looked at her team and shook her head slowly. Time of death, she said quietly. 10:47 a.m., October 14th, 2024. The courtroom went silent. My body lay behind the bench on cold marble. The unfinished sentencing document sat open above me, the last word trailing off into nothing. The gavel rested on the floor beside my open hand. As far as the 49 witnesses in that room were concerned, Judge Amir Mustafa was dead. But I was not gone. I was somewhere else entirely. And what waited for me in that place would shatter everything I had spent my entire life defending. The first thing I saw was myself. My own body lying on the cold marble floor behind the bench, robes cut open, defibrillator pads stuck to my bare chest. I was looking down at the scene from somewhere near the ceiling of Courtroom 3, hovering above it all like smoke rising from a fire that had just gone out. I could see everything. Tarek kneeling beside me, his hands shaking as he pressed his fingers against my neck searching for a pulse he would not find. The paramedic Salma standing over my body with the defeated stillness of someone who had done everything she could and failed. Court officers speaking into radios, their voices tight with panic. The gallery had erupted into chaos. Officials from the Ministry for the Propagation of Virtue were standing, some of them already pushing toward the exits. Mullahs from Kandahar and Herat were whispering among themselves, shaking their heads. The woman in the blue burqa on the right side of the gallery, the one whose knuckles had been white from gripping her own hands, was weeping silently into her palms. And then I saw the 10 defendants, still standing in the dock, still chained at the wrists and ankles. Guards had turned their attention away from the prisoners and toward the commotion at the bench. But the 10 of them were not looking at my body. They were not watching the paramedics or the panicking officials. They had their eyes closed. Their lips were moving. Every single one of them was praying. Farhan, the engineer, the one they called the leader, had his chained hands raised as far as the metal links would allow, palms open toward the ceiling. Toward me, though he could not have known I was there. I tried to shout down at them. I tried to call out to Tarek, to Salma, to anyone. But I had no voice. I had no throat. I had no body. I was pure awareness floating in a space I could not name, watching the world I had left behind continue without me. And then the courtroom began to fade. It did not disappear all at once. It dissolved. The walls went first, turning translucent like paper held up to sunlight, then vanishing entirely. The people followed, their shapes becoming outlines, then shadows, then nothing. The sounds went last. The weeping, the radio chatter, the distant chanting of the crowd outside. All of it pulled away from me like a tide retreating from shore. And when the last whisper of Courtroom 3 was gone, I was alone in darkness. Not the darkness of a room with the lights turned off. Not the darkness of night in a city where the power has failed. This was something else entirely. This was darkness that had weight. Darkness that pressed against me from every direction. Darkness so absolute and so thick that it felt as if I had been swallowed by the earth itself. There was no up, no down, no floor beneath me, no sky above. Just black emptiness stretching out in every direction without end. And silence. Silence so complete that the only thing I could hear was my own thoughts, and even those sounded like screaming. I do not know how long I drifted in that void. Time had no meaning there. It could have been seconds. It could have been centuries. I floated in the nothing, terrified in a way I had never experienced in my entire life. I had stood before warlords without flinching. I had presided over trials where armed men filled the gallery and threats were made against my life. I had never been afraid. But this darkness was different. This was not the absence of light. This was the absence of God. And for a man who had spent 41 years believing he was close to Allah, the sudden realization that I was completely and utterly alone was the most devastating thing I had ever felt. Then the faces appeared. They came slowly, emerging from the blackness like photographs rising to the surface of dark water. I recognized them immediately. Every single one. A young man named Syed, 23 years old when I sentenced him to 15 years for distributing Christian literature in the Dashti Barchi district of Kabul. A woman named Huma, 31. A mother of 4. I gave her 12 years for leading a secret prayer group in her home in Mazar-i-Sharif. An elderly man named Gul Rahman, 64. A retired teacher from Jalalabad who had converted to Christianity after his son was killed in a bombing. I sentenced him to death. He died in Puli Charki prison 8 months later. One by one they appeared before me. Face after face after face. Every person I had convicted in 19 years of service to the Sharia court. Not just the 10 in the dock that morning, but all of them. 37 men and women whose lives I had broken with my gavel and my certainty. They did not speak. They did not accuse. They simply looked at me with eyes that held something I could not bear to name. It was not hatred. It was not anger. It was sorrow. Deep and quiet and patient sorrow. As if they had been waiting for this moment. As if they had known it was coming long before I did. I was following the law, I said into the void, though I had no mouth to speak with. I was doing my duty. I was serving Allah. The faces did not change. They did not nod or shake their heads. They just looked at me. And in that look I felt something crack inside my chest. Not my heart this time. Something deeper. Something that had been sealed shut for 19 years. My conscience. Then the faces dissolved and a new presence entered the void. I felt it before I saw it. A warmth at the edges of the darkness. Faint at first, like the glow of a single candle seen from a great distance. Then brighter. Then overwhelming. The darkness did not retreat gradually. It shattered. Like black glass struck by a hammer, it broke apart and fell away in pieces, and in its place was light. Not sunlight. Not firelight. Not any light I had ever seen on earth. This light was alive. It moved. It breathed. It pulsed with something that I can only describe as personality, as if the light itself was a living being. It poured into the void from every direction at once, filling the emptiness the way water fills a vessel, completely and without effort. The warmth of it passed through me, and I felt things I had never felt before. Safety. Belonging. Love so pure and so fierce that it brought me to the edge of something I had not done since I was a child. I almost wept. Almost. But then I saw the figure walking toward me through the center of the light, and every other thought left me. He was a man. That was my first observation. A man walking with the calm, unhurried steps of someone who has all the time in existence and knows it. He was not tall, not imposing in the way that earthly power makes men imposing. He wore a simple white robe that moved around him as he walked, and the light that filled the void was not shining on him. It was coming from him. He was the source. As he drew closer, I saw his face. Middle Eastern features. Dark beard. Dark hair. Eyes that held a depth I cannot put into human language. And then I saw his hands. Scars. Both palms pierced through. Wounds that had healed but remained, worn openly like marks of identity. I saw the wound in his side, visible through the folds of his robe. I saw the faint marks across his forehead, as if something sharp had been pressed into the skin and dragged across it. I knew those marks. Every Muslim knows those marks. We are taught about them in a different context, but we know them. I whispered the name before my mind could stop me. Isa. He stopped in front of me. Close enough that if I had a body I could have reached out and touched the scars on his hands. He looked at me and his eyes held everything at once. Authority that made the most powerful men I had ever stood before look like children. Compassion so deep it reached into parts of me I had buried decades ago. And something else. Recognition. He knew me. Not the way a stranger knows a name from a file. He knew me the way a father knows the child he has watched from the first breath. Daniel, he did not say. He said my name. Amir. Just my name. One word. But the way he spoke it carried the weight of my entire existence. Every prayer I had whispered on my mat at dawn. Every verdict I had read from the bench. Every night I had lain awake staring at the ceiling with a hollowness in my chest that no amount of fasting or recitation could fill. He knew all of it. He had seen all of it. And he was not angry. He was grieving. You have been running from me for a very long time, Amir, he said. His voice was not loud. It did not echo. It simply existed everywhere at once, inside me and around me, as if the air itself was speaking. I have called you in the silence of your prayers when the words you recited felt empty and your heart cried out for something more. I called you in the faces of the people you condemned, in their peace that you could not explain, in their forgiveness that made no sense to your theology. I called you every time you felt the hollowness and pushed it down and told yourself it was just weakness. It was not weakness, Amir. It was hunger. And you have been starving. I wanted to argue. Every fiber of my religious training screamed at me to reject what I was seeing, to call it a trick of shaitan, to recite the Sharia and turn away. But I could not. Because standing in his presence, I knew with a certainty deeper than anything I had ever felt on earth that this was not deception. This was truth. Raw and blinding and terrible truth. And the most devastating part of that truth was what it meant about everything I had done for 19 years. You are Isa, I said. The prophet. He shook his head slowly. Not a prophet. Amir. I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. I am the Son of the living God. I am the one your defendants worshipped. The one you called a blasphemy. The one you condemned them for loving. Look at me and tell me what you see. I looked. And what I saw destroyed me. He was not standing in the light. He was the light. The glory radiating through the void was not some external force illuminating him from behind. It was flowing out of him the way heat flows from a flame. He was the source of it. The origin. The beginning and the end. And in that moment the theology I had built my life on, the certainty that Allah was one and could not have a son, that Isa was merely a messenger, that the Christians were deluded polytheists who deserved punishment, all of it came apart like a wall made of sand hit by a flood. It did not crumble slowly. It collapsed all at once. And what was left underneath was naked truth. I had spent 19 years condemning innocent people for worshipping the living God. I had called them blasphemers while I myself was the one blaspheming. I had destroyed families, ended lives, broken spirits, all in the name of a righteousness that was nothing more than pride dressed in religious clothing. The weight of it drove me to my knees. Or whatever passed for knees in that place without a body. I collapsed inward, folded in on myself like paper thrown into fire. And for the first time in my adult life, I wept. You persecute my beloved, Jesus said. And his voice was not thunder. It was quiet. almost gentle, which made it worse. You sit in judgment over the ones I died for. You chain their hands and silence their voices and call it justice. But there is no justice in what you do, Amir. There is only fear. Fear of losing control. Fear of questions you cannot answer. Fear of the emptiness you feel every time you press your forehead to the mat and hear nothing in return. I wanted to defend myself. I wanted to say I was following the law, that I was obeying the scholars, that I was doing what every imam and mullah and religious authority in my life had told me was right. But the words would not come. Because in his presence, every excuse I had ever constructed was transparent. He could see through them the way you see through glass. And what lay behind them was the truth I had never admitted to anyone, not even to myself. I had never heard the voice of Allah. Not once in 41 years of prayer. I had performed every ritual, observed every obligation, memorized the Quran, kept the fast, made the pilgrimage. And in return I had received silence. Absolute and unbroken silence. The hollowness I had carried for decades was not a test of faith. It was the absence of connection. I had been speaking into a void. And now, for the first time, someone was speaking back. And it was not who I expected. "Come with me," Jesus said. "There is something you must see before you return." Before I return, I repeated. I am dead. I watched them call my time. You are dead to the life you lived before, he said. But your time on earth is not finished. Not yet. There is work that must be done. Truth that must be spoken. People who need you to go back and do what you never had the courage to do while your heart was beating in that courtroom. He extended his hand toward me. The scarred palm open and waiting. I looked at it for a long moment. The wound was real. Not symbolic. Not decorative. A hole punched through flesh and bone by a Roman nail 2,000 years ago, still visible, still present, carried into eternity as evidence of what love costs when it refuses to stay silent. I reached out and took his hand. And the light around us shifted and moved like a curtain being pulled aside. We were standing in a room I recognized immediately. The private office of Mullah Qadir on the 4th floor of the Ministry for the Propagation of Virtue and Prevention of Vice in Kabul. I had been in that room many times. Dark wood furniture. A large desk covered in files. The flag of the Islamic Emirate pinned to the wall behind the chair. A window overlooking the Kabul River. Mullah Qadir sat behind the desk. He was a heavy-set man in his late 50s with a thick gray beard and small sharp eyes that never seemed to blink. He was the most powerful religious authority in Kabul province and possibly in all of Afghanistan. I had received case assignments from his office for years. I had never questioned why. Sitting across from him was a man I also recognized. Nasir, the prosecutor from the trial. The sharp-eyed man who had smiled at me in the courtroom and nodded for me to finish the sentencing. "This is 6 weeks ago," Jesus said quietly beside me. "Watch." Nasir leaned forward in his chair and placed a folder on the desk. "The Taimani group," he said. 10 converts. They have been meeting in an apartment near the Khalifa Thullah Mosque for over a year. We have surveillance. Recordings. Photographs. Enough to bury them. Mullah Qadir opened the folder and scanned the first page. Who is leading them? A man named Farhan. Former engineer. University educated. Intelligent. Dangerous. He has been organizing underground churches across 3 districts. We believe he has connections to Christian networks operating out of Pakistan and Iran. Qadir closed the folder. How many have they converted? Nasir hesitated. Our estimate is between 80 and 100 in the past 2 years. Mullah Qadir was silent for a long moment. Then he spoke in a voice so calm it was more frightening than any shout. This cannot continue. Every month I receive reports. More conversions. More secret gatherings. More young people abandoning Islam. If we do not crush this now, we lose an entire generation. What do you need from me? Nasir asked. I need a trial that sends a message, Qadir replied. Not a quiet conviction. Not a prison sentence that gets forgotten in a week. I need something the entire country sees. Something so severe that every Muslim in Afghanistan who has ever been curious about Christianity will see it and be terrified into silence. He opened the folder again and pulled out a single sheet of paper. I want all 10 of them tried together. Public courtroom. Full media access. And I want Judge Amir Mustafa on the bench. Nasir raised an eyebrow. Amir is reliable, yes. But 10 defendants at once and a death sentence for all of them? That is unprecedented. Exactly, Kadir said. Unprecedented sends a message. Amir has never failed us. He does not ask questions. He does not show mercy. He believes he is doing the will of Allah, and that belief makes him the perfect weapon. Give him the case. Stack the evidence. Make it impossible for him to rule any other way. And the defense? Nasir asked. Let them have a lawyer. It makes the process look legitimate. But the outcome is already decided. These 10 people die. And when they do, every underground church in Afghanistan closes its doors permanently. The vision froze. I turned to Jesus. My legs felt weak even though I had no legs to feel weak with. They chose me, I whispered. They specifically chose me because they knew I would not question it. They knew I would convict without hesitation. Yes, Jesus said. You were their instrument, Amir. Faithful, obedient, blind. You never asked why you received more blasphemy cases than any other judge in Kabul. You never wondered why the evidence was always overwhelming, always perfectly assembled, always impossible to challenge. You accepted it because it confirmed what you already believed. That these people were enemies of God. That destroying them was righteous work. But Amir, you were not serving God. You were serving Mullah Qadir. You were serving a system built not on faith but on fear. Not on truth but on control. And every gavel you brought down was another nail in the coffin of someone I love. I wanted to argue. I wanted to say I did not know. But the defense crumbled before I could even raise it. Because deep in my gut, in the place where honesty lives when you strip away every layer of self-deception, I had known. I had always known something was wrong. There is more, Jesus said. And the vision shifted again. We were in a small concrete cell. Dim light from a single bulb overhead. A thin mattress on the floor. A plastic jug of water in the corner. And there on the mattress, kneeling with his forehead pressed to the cold ground and his chained hands raised as far as the links would allow, was Farhan, the leader of the 10 defendants. The engineer from Taimani. This is last night, Jesus said. The night before the trial. I watched Farhan pray. His lips moved rapidly, his voice barely above a breath, and what came out was not a prayer of desperation. It was not the frantic bargaining of a man about to die. It was conversation. Intimate and steady, the way you speak to someone you know is in the room with you. Jesus, he whispered, I am ready. If tomorrow is my last day, I am ready. I have no regrets. You found me when I was broken. You put me back together. You gave me purpose. Whatever happens in that courtroom, I belong to you. But Lord, Farhan continued, and his voice cracked for the first time. There is one thing I ask. Not for myself. For Judge Amir Mustafa. He does not know you. He thinks he is serving God, but he is lost, Jesus. He is more lost than I ever was. I know who he is. I know what he did to my family. And I have forgiven him. You taught me to forgive. But forgiveness is not enough. I want him to be saved. I want him to know you the way I know you. So whatever it costs, even if it costs me my life tomorrow, use me to reach him. Please, Lord. Reach the judge. I stared at Farhan kneeling on that cold floor in chains, praying for me. Praying for the man who was going to sentence him to death in the morning. And the tears I had been holding back since this entire journey finally broke through. What did he mean? I asked Jesus. He said he knows what I did to his family. What does he mean? Jesus looked at me with those eyes that held infinite patience and infinite sorrow at the same time. Do you remember the winter of 2007? He asked. Amir, do you remember your first year as a judge? I searched my memory. Of course. I was 24. Newly appointed. eager to prove myself. I was assigned to a district court in Kabul. My very first case. A woman named Nazreen, Jesus said. Do you remember her? The name hit me like a stone thrown at close range. Nazreen. I remembered. A woman in her 40s. Arrested for possessing Christian materials. Her home in the Karti-e-Na district had been raided by religious police. They found a Bible written in Dari and a journal filled with prayers addressed to Jesus. She had 3 children. I remembered her face in the dock. Thin and drawn and exhausted, but calm in a way I could not understand. I convicted her, I whispered. 15 years. My first conviction. I was so proud of myself. I called my father that night and told him I had defended Islam. Nazreen was Farhan's mother, Jesus said. The words landed on me like the roof of a building collapsing. I could not breathe, could not think, could not process the enormity of what I was hearing. She died in Puli Charki prison 4 years into her sentence. Jesus continued. Tuberculosis. No medical treatment. Farhan was 12 years old when she was arrested. He watched the religious police drag her from their home in front of his younger sisters. He watched his father collapse into silence and grief. He watched his family fall apart piece by piece over the following years. His father stopped eating, stopped speaking, died of a heart attack 2 years after Nazreen's arrest. Some people said it was a broken heart. They were right. By the time Farhan was 17, he had lost both parents. He dropped out of school. He lived on the streets of Kabul for 3 years. He was angry. Angry at God. Angry at Islam. Angry at the judge who had taken his mother from him. Angry at you, Amir. And then I found him, Jesus said. The vision shifted one final time. I saw Farhan at 20 years old. Thin as a wire. Sleeping in a doorway in the Sharia district. Snow falling around him. A man approached. Older. Foreign. He crouched beside Farhan and offered him bread and a blanket. They spoke for a long time. The man told Farhan about a God who loved him, who had not abandoned him, who had seen every tear and carried every wound. Farhan laughed at first, then argued, then listened, then wept. And in a freezing doorway in the middle of a Kabul winter, Farhan gave his life to me, Jesus said. And the first thing he did after he found me was forgive you. He did not know your name then. He only knew your face from the courtroom. But he forgave the young judge who had taken his mother. He released you from a debt you did not even know you owed. And years later, when he learned your name, when he saw your face on the news presiding over another blasphemy trial, he did not seek revenge. He prayed. Every day for 3 years, he prayed for your salvation. And when they arrested him and told him his case would be heard by Judge Amir Mustafa, he wept with joy. Not because he wanted revenge. Because he believed I had answered his prayers. That his trial was the doorway through which I would reach you. I was shattered. There is no other word for it. 19 years of verdicts, 19 years of certainty, 19 years of believing I was righteous, and it was all rubble now. The man I was about to execute had spent years praying for my soul. The man whose mother I had destroyed had forgiven me before I even knew his name. I was the criminal. I was the guilty one. And he was the one who had been interceding for me before the throne of the very God I had refused to acknowledge. There is one more thing, Jesus said. And his voice became tender in a way that reached into the deepest part of me. Your daughter, Zara. My heart seized. What about Zara? 3 months ago, Jesus said, she found a Bible at the home of a school friend in the Khair Khana district. She has been reading it at night after you and Fatima go to sleep. She hides it inside her pillowcase. She reads by the light of her phone under her blanket. And every night she whispers the same prayer. God, is this true? Is Jesus really who this book says he is? Please show me. I am afraid to ask anyone. Please just show me yourself. My 14-year-old daughter was searching for the same God I had just met. The same God I had spent my career condemning others for worshipping. And I had been too blind, too consumed with my own hollow righteousness, to see what was happening under my own roof. Jesus, I whispered, and the name came out of me not as theology, not as debate, but as a cry from the deepest part of my being. Why are you showing me all of this? Why now? Because it is time for you to go back, he said. I am sending you back for 3 reasons. First, for Farhan and the 9 others. They must be freed. Second, for the truth. The conspiracy must be exposed. Mullah Qadir and everyone involved in manufacturing these cases must be held accountable. And third, for Zara. She is calling out to me in the dark, terrified and alone. She needs her father to come home and tell her that what she has found is real. You have 72 hours, Amir. After that, they will come for you. Apostasy, sedition, treason. You know the penalties. I know, I said. Then go, Jesus said. And do not be afraid. I am with you, even to the end. He released my hand. The light blazed one final time, so bright it consumed everything. And then I was falling back into the cold, back into the pain, back into a body that had been dead for 12 minutes and 31 seconds on the floor of Courtroom 3 in Kabul, Afghanistan. And when I opened my eyes, gasping air into lungs that had forgotten how to breathe, I knew exactly what I had to do. And exactly what it was going to cost me. Pain. That was the first thing. Not gentle pain. Not the dull ache of a headache or the sting of a paper cut. This was violence. My entire chest felt like it had been split open with an axe and put back together by hands that did not care about being gentle. Air forced its way into my lungs and it felt like swallowing fire. Every nerve in my body screamed at once, a chorus of agony that pulled me out of the light and back into the cold hard reality of a marble floor in Courtroom 3. My eyes snapped open, and the world above me was a blur of faces and fluorescent lights. Shapes moved around me. Voices crashed over each other like waves hitting rocks. He is breathing. Allah have mercy, he is breathing. Get the oxygen. Get the oxygen now. Someone pressed a mask over my nose and mouth and cool air flooded in, but I pushed it away. I did not want oxygen. I wanted to stand. I wanted to get back to the bench. I wanted to do what Jesus had sent me back to do. Hands pressed me down. Strong hands. Multiple hands. Sir, do not move. You have had a massive cardiac event. You need to stay still. The paramedic Salma was leaning over me. Her face was gray with shock. I could see in her eyes that she was looking at something she could not explain. Something that violated every piece of medical training she had ever received. No one comes back after 12 minutes with no pulse. No one wakes up lucid and fighting to stand after being pronounced dead on a courtroom floor. But here I was, breathing, conscious, alive in a way I had never been alive before. How long? I rasped. My voice sounded like gravel dragged across concrete. How long was I gone? She checked her watch and then checked the monitor attached to my chest as if she did not trust her own equipment. 12 minutes and 31 seconds, she said quietly. But sir, that is not possible. You should not be here. You should not be speaking. You should not even have brain function after that length of time without oxygen. I grabbed Tariq's arm. He was kneeling beside me, his face wet with tears he had not bothered to wipe away. Help me up, I said. Sir, you cannot. Help me up now. He looked at Salma. She shook her head. He looked back at me. Something in my eyes must have told him that no force on earth was going to keep me on that floor. He gripped my arm and pulled. Court Officer Malik appeared on my other side and together they lifted me to my feet. My legs buckled. My vision went dark at the edges. The room tilted and swam. I gripped the edge of the bench and held on until the world stopped spinning. Every breath was a battle. Every heartbeat felt like a fist pounding against the inside of my ribs. But I was standing. I was alive. And the 10 people I had been sentencing to death were still in chains in the dock, watching me with wide eyes. I climbed the 3 steps to the bench. Each step took everything I had. My robes were ruined, cut open by the paramedics, hanging off my shoulders like rags. I did not care. I reached the top, gripped the back of the chair, and lowered myself into it. The courtroom had gone completely silent. Not the respectful silence of a court in session. The stunned silence of people watching something they cannot process. I looked out over the room. The officials from the ministry were still in their seats, frozen in place. The mullahs from Kandahar and Herat stared at me with expressions that ranged from confusion to suspicion to something that looked very much like fear. The media cameras in the front rows were all pointed at me, red recording lights glowing like small steady eyes. On the right side of the gallery, the woman in the blue burqa had lowered her hands from her face and was watching me with an intensity that cut through the fabric covering her features. Beside her, the two boys sat perfectly still. And in the dock, Farhan was looking directly at me. Our eyes met, and in that moment I understood something that words will never fully capture. He knew. Somehow he knew what had happened to me in those 12 minutes. He had prayed for it. He had believed it would happen. And now he was watching it unfold. "This court is still in session," I said. My voice came out stronger than I expected. It filled the room the way a voice fills a room when it is carrying something heavier than words. "Your Honor." Nasir the prosecutor stood immediately. His face was tight with controlled alarm. "With the greatest respect, you have just suffered a cardiac arrest. You were clinically dead for over 12 minutes. This trial must be postponed until you have received proper medical attention." "Sit down," I said. He blinked. I said sit down. Something in my tone, something that had not been there before I died, made him obey. He lowered himself into his chair slowly, his eyes never leaving my face. I scanned the gallery. Mullah Qadir was not present. He never attended the trials in person. He operated from his office, pulling strings from a safe distance, letting men like me and Nasir do the visible work while he remained untouchable. But his representatives were here. Two men in the second row whose names I did not know but whose faces I recognized from the ministry. They were watching me the way handlers watch an animal that has slipped its leash. I looked down at the bench. The sentencing document lay where I had left it, still open to the page where my reading had been interrupted by death. The last word I had spoken trailed off into nothing. I picked up the document and held it in both hands. Then I tore it in half. The sound of ripping paper cut through the silence like a blade. Gasps erupted from the left side of the gallery. One of the mullahs from Kandahar stood and pointed at me. "What are you doing? That is a legal document. That is the judgment of this court." I tore the halves again. And again. Until the sentencing order was nothing but scraps of paper falling from my trembling hands onto the bench like confetti at a celebration no one had planned. "I died today," I said. The words came out steady and clear. At 10:47 this morning, my heart stopped beating in this courtroom. The paramedic team attempted to revive me 3 times. They failed. I was pronounced dead. The medical records will confirm every word of what I am telling you. For 12 minutes and 31 seconds, I had no heartbeat, no brain activity, no breath. By every medical definition, I was gone. And in those 12 minutes, I stood before God. Not Allah as I understood him. Not the distant silent deity I had prayed to 5 times a day for 41 years without ever once hearing a response. I stood before Jesus Christ. Isa al-Masih. Not as a prophet. Not as a messenger. As the living God. The Son of the Most High. The light of the world. And he showed me the truth about everything I have been doing from this bench for 19 years. The courtroom exploded. Shouts of blasphemy and apostasy erupted from the left gallery. 2 of the mullahs were on their feet. One of the ministry representatives was speaking rapidly into a phone. A woman in the gallery screamed. "He has lost his mind. He is possessed." The media cameras kept rolling. Every lens in the room was pointed at me. Every microphone was capturing every word. I picked up the gavel and brought it down 3 times. "Order. I am not finished." The noise subsided but did not disappear entirely. A low murmur ran through the room like an electric current, dangerous and alive. I continued. Jesus Christ showed me that this case is a fraud. Not just this case. Every blasphemy case I have presided over for 19 years. The evidence in this trial was manufactured. The charges were orchestrated. The outcome was decided before the defendants ever set foot in this courtroom. 6 weeks ago, a meeting took place between the prosecutor Nasir and Mullah Qadir, head of religious enforcement for Kabul province. In that meeting, Mullah Qadir ordered the prosecutor to ensure that all 10 defendants received the death penalty. Not because of the severity of their actions, but because Mullah Qadir wanted to send a message. He wanted to terrify every Muslim in Afghanistan who has ever questioned Islam or considered following Christ. I was chosen to deliver that message because I have never questioned an order. Because I have always convicted without mercy. Because I was blind and obedient and useful. Nasir shot to his feet. This is insane. This is the raving of a man who suffered oxygen deprivation. None of this is true. You know it is true, I said, looking directly at him. You sat in that office. You took the assignment. You stacked the evidence file so thick that no judge could rule any other way. You smiled at me in this courtroom 20 minutes ago and nodded for me to finish the sentencing because you knew exactly what I was going to say. Because it had already been written for me. His face went white. I turned to the gallery. I addressed everyone. The mullahs, the ministry officials, the media, the families on the right side who had been sitting in terrified silence throughout. I have convicted 37 people from this bench, I said. 37 men and women who were guilty of nothing except believing something different from what the state demands. Some of them are in Puli Charki prison right now. Some of them died there. And I put them there because I was told it was the will of God. But I know now that it was not the will of God. It was the will of men who use God's name to protect their own power. I turned to the dock. The 10 defendants stood in their chains, watching me with expressions I will carry with me for the rest of whatever life I have left. Some were weeping. Some were praying with their eyes open, lips moving silently. Maryam, the schoolteacher, had her hand over her mouth. Yusuf, the old shopkeeper from Herat, had closed his eyes and lifted his face toward the ceiling. And Farhan. Farhan was smiling. Not a smile of triumph or vindication. A smile of answered prayer. Case number K. 20241014. I announced, the state versus Farhan and 9 co-defendants is hereby dismissed. All charges are dropped. All 10 defendants are declared innocent and are to be released immediately. Remove their chains. I brought the gavel down. The cracks split the air like thunder. No one moved. The guards flanking the defendants looked at each other, then at the ministry officials, then back at me. I said remove their chains, I repeated. That is an order from this bench. Do it now. Slowly, uncertainly, the lead guard stepped forward and began unlocking the shackles. I stood from the bench. My body screamed in protest. Every joint ached. Every muscle trembled. But I walked down the 3 steps, through the gate that separates the judge from the accused, and into the dock where Farhan stood rubbing his freed wrists. The courtroom watched in stunned silence as the most feared Sharia judge in Kabul walked up to the man he had been sentencing to death and stopped in front of him. Farhan, I said. And my voice broke on his name. I know about your mother. I know about Nazreen. I was the judge who convicted her in 2007. I was 24 years old and I was proud of what I did. I called my father that night and told him I had defended Islam. I did not know she would die in prison. I did not know what it would do to your family. But ignorance is not innocence, and I am not asking you to excuse what I did. I am asking you to forgive me. For your mother. For your father. For everything that followed. Forgive me. The courtroom was so quiet I could hear the clock on the back wall ticking. Farhan looked at me for a long moment. His eyes were full of tears, but his face was steady. I forgave you years ago, Judge Amir, he said. I forgave you before I knew your name. I forgave you in a doorway in Sharia in the middle of winter on the night Jesus found me. You were the first person I forgave. Because you were the one who hurt me the most. And Jesus taught me that the deepest wounds require the deepest forgiveness. I embraced him. A Sharia judge embracing a Christian convert in the dock of a Taliban courtroom in Kabul, Afghanistan. I held him and wept into his shoulder, and he held me back and whispered words I will never forget. Welcome home, brother. Welcome home. The aftermath was immediate and violent. Before I had even released Farhan from the embrace, the ministry officials were on their phones. Within 15 minutes, Armed Taliban fighters arrived at the courthouse. They did not enter the courtroom, but they surrounded the building. Nasir had disappeared. The mullahs from Kandahar and Herat filed out in rigid silence, their faces masks of fury. The media was told to stop recording, but it was too late. The footage was already being transmitted. Within an hour, it would be on every news channel and social media platform in the region. They took me to Wazir Akbar Khan Hospital under armed escort. Not for my health. For containment. They needed time to decide what to do with a dead judge who came back to life and declared Jesus Christ as God in a Sharia courtroom. They put me in a private room on the 3rd floor. 2 guards outside the door. My phone confiscated. No internet access. No visitors except approved medical staff. But that night, Fatima came. It was past midnight when the door opened and she walked in. She had always been a strong woman. 20 years of marriage to a man who spent more time with case files than with his family had made her self-reliant in ways I had never appreciated. But tonight her strength was cracking. I could see it in the way she held her handbag against her chest like a shield. In the way her eyes were red and swollen but dry, as if she had already used up every tear her body could produce. "Daniel," she said, and then caught herself. "Amir, what have you done?" "I told her the truth," I said. She laughed, but there was no joy in it. "The truth. You stood in a Taliban courtroom and said Jesus is God. You freed 10 convicted apostates. You accused Mullah Qadir of conspiracy. Do you have any idea what is going to happen to us?" "Yes," I said quietly. "I do." She stared at me. "Zara cannot go to school," she said. "The neighbors will not look at me. My brother called and told me to leave you before they come for the whole family. Your mother is weeping and will not stop." "Fatima," I said, "have you looked inside Zara's pillowcase?" The question stopped her cold. "What?" "Her pillowcase. Have you looked inside it recently?" "Why would I look inside my daughter's pillowcase?" "Because there is a Bible in it. She has been reading it for 3 months. Every night after we go to sleep, she takes it out and reads under her blanket by the light of her phone. She has been praying in secret, asking God if Jesus is real, terrified to tell either of us because she knows what her father does to people who believe in Jesus. She knows because she has watched me do it for her entire life." Fatima's face went from anger to confusion to something that looked like the ground opening beneath her feet. "That is not possible," she whispered. "She is a good Muslim girl. She prays. She wears her hijab. She is searching," I said. "The same way I should have been searching instead of condemning others for doing it. And she found something real, Fatima. Something I found today when I died on that courtroom floor." Fatima sat down on the edge of the hospital bed. Her hands were trembling. "Even if what you say is true," she said, "even if all of it is true, they are going to kill you. You know that. Do you understand that? They will charge you with apostasy and treason, and the penalty is death." I took her hands. "I know," I said. "That is why I need you to do something. In 3 days they are coming for me. Maybe sooner. When they do, I need you to take Zara and leave Kabul. Go to your cousin Parisa in Islamabad. Get across the border. Take Zara and do not look back." "You want me to leave the country," she said. "I want you to survive. I want Zara to survive. I want our daughter to have the chance to follow the truth she has been seeking without being arrested or killed for it. And if you stay here, they will use you and Zara as leverage to force me to recant. They will threaten your lives to make me deny what I saw. And I cannot do that, Fatima. I cannot unsee what I have seen. I cannot know what I know." She pulled her hands away. "You are choosing this Jesus over your own family." "I am choosing the truth," I said. "And I am begging you to trust me. Not because I have earned that trust. I have been a terrible husband and a blind father. But because what happened to me today was real. And if it was real, then everything changes. Everything." She stood up. I walked to the door. Stopped with her hand on the handle. "I do not understand you anymore," she said without turning around. "I know," I said. "But check the pillowcase. Then decide." She left without another word. I lay back on the hospital bed and stared at the ceiling. 72 hours. That is what Jesus had said. I had already used nearly half of them. The clock was running and I could feel it in my chest, ticking alongside the heartbeat that should not have been there. I closed my eyes and prayed. Not to the silence I had prayed to for 41 years. To Jesus. The one who had answered. The one who had sent me back. The one who had told me not to be afraid. I am not afraid, I whispered. But I am running out of time.